Well, guys, before I bring you this episode of Say the Braves, let me just very quickly wish everybody out there a Merry Christmas. I appreciate so much when you guys tune in to an episode of State of the Braves. But um, but outside of that, this is a special. I mean, we could call it a special Christmas Eve episode. I'm going to do one before Christmas Day, obviously, um, and all that. But I hope you enjoy this episode. But after you listen, I hope you just take some time with family and friends and enjoy Christmas. So, guys, again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Well, Braves fans, over the last couple episodes I've done in this off season, my focus has been trying to project or predict what Alex Anthopolous might do this off season. What I did not have on my bingo card was do nothing. that was not something I thought was going to happen. Now it hasn't really been nothing. It's been cost cutting measures. We've seen several guys' options get declined. Travis d'Arnaud's option was declined. He's moved on to the Angels. We've seen some of those types of things. But I mean, in terms of spending any kind of money or trading for any kind of player, just has not happened. It's been a lot of things around the edges with clearly depth moves only. And as a fan, as you watch the Phillies and the Mets and fill in the blank team make big moves, it makes you antsy, right? You want your team to improve. You see other teams around you improving, and it gets a little frustrating. It certainly is easy to get impatient. So anyways, in this episode, we're certainly going to talk about the Braves inactivity, still what they might do. I'm getting less and less aggressive in predicting anything the Braves might do because, I mean, they really might not do much at all this offseason. I still think they're going to do something, but certainly it doesn't seem to be on our timetable. So stick around for this episode of Stay the Braves and we'll talk about it. All right, guys. Well, the Braves exited the winter meetings. They did not make any big moves of note on their roster. In the meantime, they've really only made these depth additions around the edges. And, Brian De La Cruz, I mean, who do you want to talk about? There's not really much worth mentioning. He's kind of the biggest name in terms of if he played at his highest level, then he's a good addition. He certainly has some power, but they made some depth bullpen pieces or middle infielders, but these guys are kind of quad A guys. In some ways, it just feels like they're filling out the AAA roster and they're picking up guys with some options. And certainly that matters. I mean, a season that they just went through with so many injuries, I think Anthopoulos is definitely reacting to that, and he's building up as much depth as possible. I think that is one thing I've seen of Alex every offseason tends to be a little bit of a reaction to the previous season and, some weaknesses. One year they had a lot of trouble with the bullpen and they had to go get bullpen guys at the trade deadline. And, so the next offseason they really went heavy on the bullpen. I don't know. It just seems to be that way. Not that that's bad. I mean, it's good to learn from some of your mistakes, but it does seem a little reactionary. And in the meantime, here we are as Braves fans. We're not excited by these really, really minor moves. We want the Braves to improve things. And coming off of a frustrating 2024 season, you really want to see some improvement in some obvious areas, right? Starting pitching, left field, a couple of things that you just really feel like shouldn't be too difficult to improve, right? They're just obvious holes that you have in your roster. And you start wondering, well, are they going to do much of anything to fill those? So Braves country is growing increasingly impatient, and I cannot say that I blame you guys. I definitely feel some of that as well. Chipper Jones recently went on a podcast and kind of came to Alex's defense. You might have saw that. He made the case that Alex has done nothing to cause Braves fans to question his ability to put together a great lineup, to put together a great roster. I generally agree with Chipper. I do think Alex tends to be incredibly rigid in his decision making. He certainly hasn't been flawless in every decision he's made. Look, the guy came in, he built a great roster. The Braves last year for the first time didn't win the division under Alex, but they've made the playoffs every year. We can say all those things, and it's all true. And he's done some tremendous things. I mean, the 2021 World Series is largely on the back of Alex's moves, which in hindsight looked brilliant. But I don't think Alex could have even imagined that those moves that he made at that trade deadline would have worked out as perfectly as they did. But I would say since 2021, it's been, I don't know if a spotty record is fair enough. I mean, he made tremendous moves with Ronaldo Lopez and Chris Sale last offseason, but it's been hit and miss. And Jared Kelenic comes to mind as one of those misses. I mean, it certainly seems like a miss at this point. And left field still is a question mark. You can't blame Alex for the injuries. And I'm not really blaming Alex generally, but man, it is hard to watch this offseason kind of, day by day. Not much has been happening. So, look, no one can expect any GM to be flawless. Anthopolous has not been flawless, but he has been very good. But every offseason is its own thing. And typically, Alex has been very aggressive early, and he just hasn't been that way this offseason. So it does feel odd. It feels just outside of his norm. Typically, the Braves, he gets things done in November, and he's mostly done. And at that point, he's just working around the edges. And this time, he didn't really do anything big early, and he's working around the edges now. And you just feel like, well, okay, does that mean we're not going to do anything? I don't think so, but I think with the free agent prices, they've been so high that I'm not saying it caught them off guard, but I think it's made the Braves. It probably took some guys off the boards that they thought they were at least going to be in the market for, and it's made the trade market much more active just with all teams. And so I think it's made it harder on both ends, right? They're not going to play in free agency much, especially for the big names, and there's just more teams vying for these few trade pieces. So I think he's going to have to be even more creative with who he targets and what trades they might make. I really expect them mostly to be involved in trades and not free agency, because all these guys are so expensive right now. But yeah, it's one of those things. I do trust Alex just in terms I think he's one of the better GMs in baseball. He has made some decisions that I disagreed with. There have been some decisions that I thought were interesting, like the Jared Kelenic decision at the time. I was kind of interested in, but it was obviously a gamble at the same time, and it just didn't work out. Obviously the Sean Murphy deal has not worked out, and that one, in hindsight, just kind of looks like a dud. But Murphy, maybe he bounces back this year, and it totally changes our minds on things. So anyways, Chipper comes to the defense of Anthopolous. He also alluded in that interview that there might be some financial restrictions on Alex that Alex is working under. That was hard for me to read in terms of, the Braves are never going to be in like what the Mets just did with Soto. They're never going to be in that type of market with the top 2 or 3 teams in baseball. What I couldn't tell is if Chipper was saying that there were more specific financial restrictions on Alex this season. And, he didn't get into that. I don't know if Chipper knows. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But yeah, it's unknown exactly what financial restrictions exist on the payroll this offseason. On the one hand, the Braves should continue to spend at high levels. I think they absolutely should be a top 5 or top 6 spending team in baseball. They have had a high level of success. Braves country comes out to their games, and the Battery, they get just tremendous amount of revenue from the Battery every year. Just a huge moneymaker. So the Braves are making money, right? They're not really. They shouldn't have to be rubbing 2 pennies together to make ends meet. But the Braves also are not run by a mega billionaire like the Mets are, who he can just say, I want to go get Juan Soto no matter what, and I'll pay whatever. The Braves aren't run like that. They're run like a publicly traded company that they are. So they're always going to operate with revenue in mind. And so they're going to take that measured approach. And until, one day they get sold to Elon Musk or something, it's just going to stay that way. Maybe I should put that on Twitter, by the way. He bought Twitter when someone said maybe you should do that. So maybe I should lob that one to him and see what happens. I don't know if he cares much about baseball though. So all right, so Alex doesn't care much about. I mean, any telling them to, but I Braves just to play, and then and playoff was such a just I don't know. It's a little bit of a a tough feeling right now, I think, for some Braves fans. Um, so yeah, we're 3 years removed from the World Series. We do have this core still locked up. We have the hopes of Strider and Acuna coming back, but you've got in the last 4 years you've had three beloved Brave stars leave via free agency, and again some other longtime Braves also leave. Um, what's the overall impact just from a fan standpoint, fan attitudes on these beloved players leaving? I mean, I'm always going to say that Freddie Freeman was the big one. And I still think to this day it was the hugest mistake to let him go just from a fan standpoint, organizational standpoint, and of course, now he's World Series MVP, and you kind of look back and you're just like, man, what did we do? And I'm not going to rehash that part, but I think just from a organizational standpoint, there's a difference between some of your other good players that you might allow to leave via free agency, like Dansby and like Max, where the market just explodes, and you're just not going to pay that level of salary to those guys. I think them leaving makes sense, but Freddie leaving I think is always going to sting. I think I will always consider a huge a mistake. I mean, it was a mistake on both their parts, and some people will say it was more on Freddie and his agent than the Braves, but it takes two, and the two sides should have got together. All that being said, right, that kind of started off what I would say is a period of time that's been a little more disappointing for the Braves and kind of how they've ended each season. And then 2024 was just a year of disappointment. So all of that's true, and the fans have experienced all of that, right? So when beloved players leave, it impacts every fan base. Some fan bases have to deal with it more than others. I mean, the Braves actually don't have to deal with it near as much as a lot of these other fan bases. The small market teams where their favorite players are always leaving. I mean, that would just be brutal. But still, losing these players, I think, makes winning that much more important. The two things that I think typically bring fans to the ballpark and gets you to continue to watch, and especially kids, is your favorite players on the team. You go and see your favorite player, and your team is winning. And those two things put people in the seats, keep people watching. And so the Braves certainly have kept winning, even though last year was not as much, but they have kept winning. But the Braves, they've got these guys locked up, great, but they got to keep winning. And I think, as maybe some new guys come into the fold, you want to highlight those guys and keep them around if possible. So, all right. So there's that reality. I think, like I said, building frustration coming off of 2023 postseason, then the disappointment and the full 2024 season debacle that was last year. I just don't blame any Braves fans for wanting Alex to make some bold moves this offseason, and then the exact opposite has happened. It's just radio silence. So he obviously hasn't been fast to act. And the early trend is that he is mostly content with the team he has. And that was also true last offseason. But, you didn't have an Acuna or a Strider coming off of injury. I think that too has been underplayed. I think the Strider and Acuna injuries last year had way more impacts than we even can appreciate. Obviously on the 2024 team, but even the timing of when they come back, the unknown of what type of player they're going to be, short term as they're coming off of injury, when exactly they're going to be able to play part-time, when they'll be able to play full-time. I think it's making it way more difficult for Anthopolous and the Braves to make certain decisions about how to build this 2025 roster. And I can appreciate that. There was Strider came on to the Corey Kluber podcast about a week or so ago. I was able to watch that one. He was pretty, of course, it's just coming from him, not the doctors, but he was pretty encouraged that he might be able to have a regular spring training and mostly be ready, ramped up for regular season. Maybe into April a little bit, but from his standpoint, and he did say without any setbacks, that should be the timetable. So that's really encouraging. Maybe the Braves are stepping back a little bit from we really need to go out and get another, high leverage starter. So that's at least a little bit of encouraging news. Doesn't mean they shouldn't go out and get a starter, but again, it's all assuming that Strider is going to be good to go, and he has to meet these benchmarks all the way leading through spring training. And you just don't know that that's going to happen for sure. So it's really hard, I think, for the Braves to plan that out. All right, so let's get into the offseason a little bit. Reports are, this happened about a week ago. Reports are that Nathan Eovaldi was high on the Braves target list early in the offseason. But he chose to remain with the Rangers for 3 years and $75 million. My take is that the Braves love what Eovaldi is about. If you know much about Nathan Eovaldi, I think he's won 2 World Series, one with the Red Sox, one with the Rangers. He's known for being like one of the best clubhouse guys, best teammates in baseball. That sounds like a Braves kind of guy. And he would have been a good upgrade to Morton leaving, an older pitcher, but still pretty much on top of his game. And, he didn't sign with the Braves. He goes back to the Rangers. Originally his, I think MLB trade rumors had him projected at 2 years, $22 million a year. He ends up getting 3 years, $75 million total, $25 million a year. So I guarantee you the Braves were not all that comfortable going 3 years for, I think Eovaldi is 35. So it looks like at that point they pivoted to try to acquire Garrett Crochet. The Braves were listed as one of the 5 finalists for Crochet, but the Red Sox were able to acquire Crochet for 4 position player prospects. I think I told you guys in my last 2 episodes, I just did not, I literally could not construct a trade that made sense for the Braves and the White Sox. It just didn't line up with, news was that the White Sox only wanted position player prospects that didn't have any major league time. The Braves just don't have that in their system, guys with any kind of value. They've got 2, basically, with Drake Baldwin and Nacho Alvarez. So it's nice to hear that the Braves tried. I'm a little surprised they would even be listed as one of the 5 finalists for Crochet. I'm not exactly sure what they offered. But I'm not surprised another team was able to outbid them. Now, what I'll say, and the reason why I'm mentioning these 2, these 2 bits of news tell us the Braves are actively looking to add to the rotation. I mean, the Braves haven't made a big move, but they've at least been, it's not like Alex is on the couch eating cheese puffs and not doing anything. Like he's going for it, but they haven't been willing to go as far as some of these other teams, or they weren't able to go as far as some other teams, in terms of going to acquire Crochet. But if they are actively looking to add to the rotation, I take that, as a positive. But also, if Evaldi was plan A and Crochet was plan B. Both of those have failed. So is there a plan C for another starter, another impact starter? Do they go back to the free agent market? There's fewer and fewer options out there. I mean, there are guys out there, but they're all kind of, I mean, I'll mention a few as I go on in this episode, but there are fewer options than obviously there were about a week ago. You could still try to trade for an impact arm, or maybe they just pivot to a bigger piece in the outfield or even shortstop at this point if they can't get a big starter in free agency or through trade. My guess is that they don't do anything big on the free agent market this offseason. The free agent values have just exploded. Other teams have grabbed names linked to the Braves as just possible targets. So let me list some guys that are totally off the board, and then I'll spend the rest of the episode talking about potential guys that are still out there. All right, so in terms of starters that are off the board, Walker Buehler went to the Red Sox, 1-year deal, about $20 million. Tomoyuki Sugano is coming from Japan. I think he's like 35. He went to the Orioles on a 1-year, $15 million deal. Nestor Cortez, Yankees lefty, got traded to the Brewers for Devin Williams in a 1-for-1 swap. He's basically a 1-year rental. Jesus Luzardo, kind of surprisingly, goes within the division from the Marlins to the Phillies. He was one particularly I'd mentioned a couple times as a Braves target, and the fact that he goes to the Phillies, that one stings a little bit more. But he has kind of been often injured, so we'll see what kind of impact. If he's healthy, that could be a really bad thing for the Braves because he's pretty good. Outfielders that have been on the move, Jock Peterson, another guy I would have loved to see back in a Braves uniform. He gets a good deal, 2 years, $37 million from the Rangers. He was projected at 2 years, $28 million by MLB Trade Rumors. Max Kepler, 1 year, $10 million deal. Again, the Phillies being very active this week. Cody Bellinger, the big trade to the Yankees. Of course, his name had been mentioned a lot in trade rumors, and we talked about him maybe being a fit for the Braves if the Cubs would eat some money. Ultimately, the Yankees took on his money for the most part, and the Cubs didn't get much in return on that deal. And then, of course, what started that deal was Kyle Tucker was traded from the Astros to the Cubs, and I would have absolutely loved Kyle Tucker in a Braves uniform, even though he is only 1 year away from free agency, and the Cubs are going to have a hard time extending him before that. Shortstop, the only guy I'll mention is Nico Horner. He wasn't moved, but because Isaac Paredes went to the Astros in the Kyle Tucker deal, it's very unlikely that Nico Horner is going to be traded. So he's been a guy that we've talked about several times on the radar for the Braves. Okay, so those are all the more recent moves since I talked to you guys last, just so we can all get on the same page. One note that I'll make, of the free agents mentioned, every one of them outperformed MLB Trade Rumors projected contract amounts in terms of annual value. So everybody's getting paid. Again, this just highlights, if the Braves are looking for value in the free agent market, it's not there. It's not to be had. You're basically going to have to overpay these guys, especially if they're kind of on the more top tier, maybe the best top half of the free agent market. You're overpaying for those guys. So the number one question for me, does the Braves' inaction thus far mean that they are trying to stay under this CBT number, which I've heard is around $22 to $24 million to spend, which is not much, because especially if you want to keep a little money for, if you have to make moves in season or at the trade deadline, you're probably not going to spend all of that right now. So, I've done some episodes on if the Braves have to stay under it, how might they do it? Some of those options are still there. I don't think the Braves necessarily think of this in a cut and dry way. Like, I don't know that Alex has been told you can't go over this number, but I think it is more likely that they stay under this number, especially with how the offseason has gone thus far, the cost-cutting moves, the inactivity, and just building up depth. But I think if they also find a move that's just too good to pass up, where they do go over that number, they would do it. So that's where I mean is I don't think it's cut and dry. I also think Alex is always thinking of both the short and long term together. He's not just thinking of the best way to build a 2025 team. He's also thinking long term. And, is there a way to improve the team in 2025 while setting up best for 2026 and beyond? And with the CBT number in, when you're thinking about that, staying under it probably does set up, future seasons a little better. So I think it's a pull for them to stay under that number, but it's not necessarily, again, a hard and fast thing. All right, so let me go through some names that, at least to this point, are still remaining, still available, both in free agency, and then I'll go through a couple guys via trade that might still be out there. Pitchers that are still out there: Jose Quintana, Max Scherzer, Justin Verlander, Roki Sasaki. I wouldn't get my hopes up on that one, but he is out there, and man, that would really change the offseason for the Braves. Shinosuke Ogasawara. Man, I hope I said that right. And then Charlie Morton. All right, so those are some pitching options. It's not the full list, but those are some ones that I would be more interested in that could bring some value. Ogasawara is a guy who, coming from Japan, he hasn't been talked as much about as Sasaki, but he's a younger guy that might bring some interesting value. So I think it's worth at least considering, though the Braves don't typically deal with Japanese players and Asian players as much for some reason. But Jose Quintana is a guy that I've thrown around some that I thought the Braves might be interested in. Scherzer and Verlander on one-year deals. Verlander especially because he'd be a little cheaper probably than Scherzer, and he's always made a little bit of sense to me. I think at this point he's made his money. He certainly made his money. So has Scherzer, and I think they both just want to win and be on a winning team. So it wouldn't shock me if a one-year deal for one of those guys came down the pike. Outfielders that are still available. The list is getting less and less. Jerkson Profar is still the big name out there. Randall Grichuk and Austin Hayes are two right-handed hitters that mash lefties, could probably be had on a one-year deal. And then Hassan Kim, and as far as shortstops, is still available as well. But remember, any of these free agent players, it seems like you have to pay up more. Maybe the longer you go in the off season, the less that's true, as certain teams kind of finalize their rosters earlier. Maybe that's what Alex is hoping for, but these are some names that are still available. All right, bigger names that have been rumored to be on the trade market. Pitchers: Luis Castillo for the Mariners, Dylan Cease for the Padres, and fairly recently, Pablo Lopez for the Twins has popped up as to the Twins might be willing to listen on him. The Twins are definitely in cost-cutting mode, and so how they're going to do that remains to be seen. I don't think they would prefer to trade Lopez as their number one cost-cutting option, but maybe they get to that point. And man, he's a very good pitcher. He'd probably be the most expensive of those three to acquire via a trade, just in terms of who you're sending back. Dylan Cease is just a one-year rental, but obviously very talented. And Luis Castillo had a little bit of a down year with the Mariners last year, but him and Lopez you're getting for 3 years. And Castillo's not quite as expensive as the other two. So I think I like all things being equal, I think I like Lopez best for 3 years, but Castillo might be the more gettable guy. Him and Lopez, I think Castillo's making about $25 million a year. Lopez makes about $22 million a year. Cease less than that on a one-year deal. So I think all those guys are potentials. Okay, and then outfielders: Adolis Garcia. I've mentioned him multiple times. We'll see about the Rangers. They traded Nathaniel Lowe to the Nationals a couple days ago. I don't know if that's going to be their only cost-cutting measure or if they might cut ties with Garcia as well. Taylor Ward for the Angels, and then Luis Robert again for the White Sox. White Sox certainly want to move him, but apparently their asking price has been really high. But I mean, at this point, I can't imagine he would start the season with the White Sox. All right, so all those guys are still on the board, still possibilities. So, a couple other thoughts I've had. I've had the thought of, well, what if the Braves swapped a pitching prospect for an outfield prospect that's basically major league ready? And that is a cheap way too, where they could install a left fielder, talented, young, unproven a little bit, but certainly a cheaper option if they're looking to stay under that CBT number. So I've identified a few names that you guys, if you don't know them, you could go look them up a little bit more. Maybe you do know these guys if you guys are really in the weeds like I am. So the first one, and this isn't like in order in terms of my favorite or the most likely, but the first that I'll mention is Owen Casey. He is a high-level Cubs prospect. The Cubs are basically set in the outfield, right? They add Kyle Tucker. So at least for 2025, they're set. And they have very little organizational pitching depth. So Casey is the number 34 prospect according to Major League Baseball and all baseball. He's got huge power, very good defensively. He's knocking on the door of the big league club, so he could probably be installed directly. In terms of value, it would probably be a Owen Casey for an AJ Smith-Shawver, just straight up deal. The next guy, Heston Kjerstad for the Orioles. He is probably the most major league ready of any of these guys. He's played some in the big leagues. He's a little older. He's just absolutely crushed at AAA. The Orioles, they don't really have much of a spot for him. So, and they are very rich in, in guys playing in the field, and yet they really need pitching. They're pitching poor. So he would be the most expensive one here, maybe a Smith-Shawver, Owen Murphy, plus Bryce Elder. You kind of give them three guys at different varying levels of ability and promise there, and you get a really good left-handed hitting starting outfielder. The next guy I'll mention, Alejandro Osuna. He's with the Rangers. He's probably the least known of these guys. He's probably the least major league ready. He made it to Double-A last year, but really crushed the baseball. He would be the cheapest acquisition because he's not quite major league ready. Maybe just Owen Murphy straight up in a deal like this. Three more guys. Jordan Beck, Colorado. He got his first taste of big league action last year. Actually struggled a good bit. So it's hard to believe the Rockies would sell low on him, but throughout all the minor leagues, he just dominated. Maybe Hurston Waldrop straight up for Jordan Beck. The next guy I'll mention is Colby Thomas with the A's. He had a huge season between Double-A and Triple-A last year. Major power, really good on base percentage, solid defender in the outfield as well. The A's have very few pitchers knocking on the upper echelon of the minor leagues, and so maybe a Smith-Shawver straight up for Colby Thomas. And then the last guy I'll mention is Christian Campbell, Red Sox. He is I think he's 10th overall in Major League Baseball, so I'm reaching for this one a little bit. In this one, I would tie him to Trevor Story. I mentioned to you guys, Trevor Story is kind of an outside-the-box idea for the Braves to change things at shortstop a little bit. So if the Braves did Tristan Campbell and combine that with Trevor Story, and they'd still have to receive some money back from the Red Sox at that point. But if the Red Sox really want to get Trevor Story off their books, maybe the Braves could throw Drew Hackenberg and send Orlando Arcia back with them to cover shortstop for them. I don't know if they'd be willing to do that, but they basically have three good starting outfielders right now. Tristan Campbell has been kind of a second base / outfielder. But he is, you look him up, he dominated. I think he was the offensive minor league player of the year last year. So he just dominated the minors last year. So look, any of those guys, I would be fine installing in left field and letting them play. Some I'd be more excited than others, but I think that's an option for the Braves. You just, especially the guys where you could exchange one good pitching prospect for a starting outfielder. I think it'd be worth doing. One final idea, you guys, if you followed the A's at all, weirdly they're going to be playing in Sacramento this year. Actually, for the next few years until they can move, I guess, to Las Vegas. They have been. The word is that they need to get up to $105 million on their payroll to avoid litigation from the Players Association. I won't go into all the details of that, but they're several $1,000,000 still away from that. I think their most recent tax number was 88 million, right? So still, what is that? Like 17 million off. So could the Braves pry away one of their young, controllable outfield prospects? For like maybe you send, and I'm just throwing the guy's name out there, Raisel Iglesias. He's got 1 year left. Yes, that would hurt your bullpen. You'd have to rebuild your bullpen a little bit. But if you sent him away, you create a little more financial flexibility on your payroll end, and you get a starting outfielder. Maybe that's something the Braves would be willing to do with the A's, right? You take their unique situation, their sudden willingness to take on money, and you make something happen like this. All right, so I'm just saying that, I mean, clearly the Braves are trying to be, they're not targeting the same guys that most of the rest of the competing clubs are doing this offseason. So what will Alex do? I mean, at this point, I have no idea. Will he do anything? I really hope so. At this point, I don't know. I'm hoping for maybe at least one big trade to at least address outfield or the pitching staff. But we just don't know what restrictions Alex is working under right now. It does feel like the Mets and Phillies are getting better while the Braves are just standing still. I mean, that's just kind of true. You can say the Braves have the better roster overall, but at the very least, the Phillies and Mets are getting closer and closer. The Braves roster is still one of the most talented in baseball. So yes, that is true. I just hope that Alex can build a really good 2025 roster and that the talent that is on this club is not wasted for a year waiting for 2026 and that CBT number maybe to reset. So, all right, guys. Well, I hang in there. This has been a dead off season so far, but hopefully you guys will enjoy your Christmas. I really do wish you a Merry Christmas and some great time with family and friends and all that. So God bless. I'll talk to you soon.